Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Sonic Discovery. I am your host, David Correa. On this one, we'll be covering music from Preoccupations, Mount Eerie, SOB RBE, and Park Jiha. Well guys, welcome to the show. If you're not familiar with Sonic Discovery, basically what I do is I go through new releases that come out every week, and I let you know what I think. I typically only review 3, but I decided to kind of throw in a bonus one this week. First up, we're going to be talking about the 3rd release from the Calgary band Preoccupations. They first came out with their debut album when they were under the name Viacom, but that name proved to be a little controversial, so they decided to switch it over to Preoccupations, and that was the name of their most recent album, the one before this one. And on this one, they decided to name it New Material, because I guess that's what it was, and they had already done self-titled for the last 2. This one continues the kind of post-punk dark wave sound that they've done in previous work, but I feel that the more music they've been releasing, the lighter the tone has gotten, so we do see a bit of color introduced on this release. You notice this change on the opening track, Espionage. Here we have kind of like a dark wave sound, but still a little bit of brightness brought in just to make it a bit catchy. The lyrics on this album are all pretty dark, as you can tell on this one, as they keep repeating the words, "Change is everything, but it's nowhere to be found." Decompose has a nice sound on the guitar that almost sounds like harps, and that kind of adds some brightness to an overall gloomy track. Here, the vocals don't seem to be as low as they usually are, and that also adds to some of the brightness as well. Disarray is a pretty catchy song here. The vocals still kind of keep the song with a darker tone, but the music here is a lot brighter. Manipulation is a track that slows it down a bit and keeps the dark tone. And on here, there's these build-ups that happen in the music that I enjoyed. Solace has a pushing bass and shimmering guitars, which kind of gives it like a catchy quality to it. Doubt has a darker tone and like a sluggish pace as they keep repeating the line, "We self-divide and multiply." And the album closes with Compliance, which is an instrumental track, very much drone sounding, but there are these 3 tones that happen that are a bit fuzzy, but just hearing these 3 tones repeated throughout, and eventually there's some drums that come in that I liked, but that's enough to keep this song being interesting. Overall, the changes here were a bit subtle, just adding a little bit more color to the formula that they had already built. So I feel like, they're moving in a good direction and, just gonna experiment a little bit more, little minor tweaks here and there to, make them even more compelling. This is gonna give them a score of an 8 out of 10 from me. So I recommend that if you've listened to Preoccupations before, you continue to do so. And if you are not familiar with the band and you want to hear something with like a darker tone but some shades of color, then I'd say give this a try. The next album keeps us kind of in a gloomy state as we cover the newest release from Mount Eerie. This is called Now Only. Now, Mount Eerie is the stage name of singer-songwriter Phil Everum, and this happens to be his 9th release and the follow-up to last year's A Crow Looked at Me. Now, if you're familiar with that album at all, you'll know that it was purely almost all acoustic and incredibly depressing because it deals with the death of his wife that happened the year before. Her name is Guinevere Castrate Everum, and she was an artist herself. I believe she released some music. She was also like a painter, and she died of cancer, and that whole album just dealt with him coping with that, coping with her loss and her not being there and him having to raise their daughter on their own. It's a great album in like on an artistic level, but just kind of a hard listen because it is incredibly depressing and the music also is very somber. But if that's what you're into, then I recommend you go check that out because it was on a lot of people's year-end lists, so a lot of people thought it was something you should check out. This album kind of keeps it going in the same direction. Lyrically, it's very similar, him talking about his wife. Here, though, he also kind of talks about mortality in general and brings out the music a little bit more. Starts incorporating other instruments, which I thought sometimes gave the song little shades of color that it needed. The opening track, Tintin in Tibet, has, actually some happier moments in here, as he's picking out different moments that he shared with his wife that I think, he's reflecting on fondly. But then in the end, he still ends up just kind of having a longing for her not being around. So it starts off a little happy, but eventually settles back into a much more somber tone. Distortion is an 11-minute track, and this one starts off with these distorted strums that, kind of make an appearance there and make appearances throughout the song, but it's mostly acoustic. Here he talks about different experiences, in his life when he's had to deal with either life or death. One of them is when he first realizes as a kid that everyone will eventually die. Another is when he had a pregnancy scare with, he was kind of traveling around and he met this girl, never expecting to really see her again. And, turns out she might have been pregnant. And just him having to come to terms with possibly being a dad at 23. And just, other little tidbits here that he goes through in the full 11 minutes. But I thought this was a satisfying track. On the title track, Now Only, we get more instrumentation. Here we bring in drums and piano and bass, and despite most of the song sounding very dark, the chorus here provides us a nice little burst of light. On here, he's talking about how all of us that are alive are just kind of lucky to be doing so, because, death just happens all of a sudden, and we can't really control it, and you never really know when it's gonna be your turn. You really just gotta live life to the fullest and enjoy it while you have it. Earth is another track that's almost purely acoustic, but here there's moments where we get distorted guitar, bass, and drums. Here he talks about, spreading his wife's ashes and, how there were fragments of bones, and he felt like he could see these bones and imagined what bone that could be. Is that part of her skull that once held her brain, that had all these amazing thoughts, or, part of her finger that would touch and caress him? It's a pretty sad song, and really just makes you wish that you're never in this position yourself. Two Paintings by Nicholas Ostrov is a 9.5-minute song in which he goes over two paintings and, kind of just correlates them to life in general, and how, that moment, again, of not really knowing when life's going to go and how it's always fleeting. Like Nikolai, for example, he happened to be 47 when he died, and he was working on building a studio for himself. And, he wouldn't have gone through that process if he known that he wasn't going to be alive to enjoy it. And the last track, Crow Part 2, is one in which he directly talks about how the death is really not just affecting him, but also affecting his daughter, and how they kind of keep the hope that she's around them just by little things that they notice here and there, or things that they see, and they almost feel like that energy of hers is there, but, they're not really sure, and, that sad realization that feeling's eventually going to fade away. Overall, like I said, I think I enjoyed this more than A Crow Looked at Me, just because the production on here is fuller. There's more to listen to, and lyrically, still kind of keeps us within the same realm. But in there, I believe that there's a bit more optimism that I heard on the last project. This is going to get a score of an 8 out of 10 from me. So if you listened to that last one and you enjoyed it, then I recommend you check this one out too. Next up, we have the debut release from Bay Area rap group SOB RBE. This is called Gangin'. So the name kind of stands for Strictly Only Brothers. That's the first part, and the second part is their entertainment group. And like I mentioned, they're from the Bay Area. The group consists of Young Theo, The Boy, Slimmy B, and Lil G. And I previously talked about these guys because they were featured on the track Paramedic with Kendrick Lamar off of the Black Panther soundtrack. And I remember really enjoying that song because I thought that these guys, actually had some good flow in their verses, and that's exactly what we get on here. But although, I was a fan of their flows, the real winner on this album for me is the production, which, has more of a trap style, but also incorporates these cool synth patterns that mostly on a lot of tracks gave me an 80s vibe. The album opens up with the track Carpooling, which has a bright synth line over a quick beat as it samples the song Silent Morning by Noel. Here, every member takes a turn, giving us one aggressive verse after the other. The next track, On Me, has keys that lead us in, that give us more of that 80s sound before that trap beat drops in. Here, they talk about their experiences and how it's the real deal and not some made-up shit. Antisocial gives us a smoother sound on the production and has a really catchy hook as it samples the track Attack Me With Your Love by Cameo. Here, Young T.O. and The Boy rap about not just fame, but also not being fans of those guys that are, just faking it. Lifestyle gives us more of a banging production as we have a really catchy melody and Young T.O. providing us with a really good hook. Here the group talks about having to deal with having a tough life in order to eventually get to a better one. Always provides us with probably my favorite production on this album as it slowly starts building as the track gets started. And when it does, it has that instantly catchy hook hit you right at the beginning. Here the guys are talking about their brotherhood and how they're really going to stand by and protect each other. After that, we have each member given a chance to tackle on a track on their own. First up, we have The Boy on Paid in Full, which has him giving us an aggressive verse over some very aggressive production. After that, we have Slimmy B tackling the track God, which gives us a different sound in the production here. It's not as hard-hitting, but still very bass-heavy. Here he talks about the reason why he's doing this is really to provide for his family. After that, we have The Man Who, which is Lil G's solo track, and here he's talking about the only reason why people are coming around now is because he's getting paid. And, his verse was okay, but the production really did nothing for me on this track. The same can really be said for a Young T.O. solo track called Young. Although he does an effective job on the hook, as always, the rest of the song just kind of felt a little flat to me. The album does get back on track for its final two songs. List gives us a catchy synth line over more of a relaxed beat as the guys discuss having to come from nothing and now having everything because of their success. And a similar thing can be said about the final track, Once Upon a Time, in which the guys are talking about the changes going on in their life after their success. And I really love the production on this track. It gave me more of an 80s vibe again. And I feel like there's a sample being used, but I can't quite really put my finger on it from where. Overall, I thought this was a pretty impressive debut. Lyrically here, the guys do a pretty good job. They have, some pretty good flows. I was impressed with Young T.O.'s way around the hook and adds this, kind of catchiness to it along with the production. This is going to end up getting a score of a 7.5 out of 10 for me. So if you're on the hunt for a young rap group that's just getting started and, potentially see a lot of good things from, then I'd say give this a listen. And last on the show, we have a little bonus one. This is an album from a Korean composer. Her name is Park Jiha, and this album is called Communion. Now, what I found very fascinating from this is that she mostly takes different instruments that are native to Korean music, very traditional sounds, and bridges this with bits of jazz and moments of ambient music as well to create something pretty fascinating. Some of the tracks on here can be very relaxing, like the opening track, Throughout the Night, which sounds like two dueling woodwind instruments playing a very somber melody. A similar thing can be said for the title track Communion and The Longing of Yongin Divide, which have a nice woodwind melody playing over a bed of soft bells. On other tracks like Accumulation of Time, we have this beautiful plucking sound that's going on. I'm not quite sure what instrument is being played. I think it's from Korea, but it has a great reverb on it. Just the sound resonates so well. And here it mostly stays very tranquil, but there are moments where the plucking can get very aggressive. All Souls Day also kind of starts off with a continuous plucking sound, but this has horns and percussion that really start to settle in around the 3-minute mark. Here, I also appreciated the sound of the percussion that's brought in. You hear wood blocks, you hear xylophones, as those are mixed in with the plucking sound. And later on, the horns come back in to really give the song a more loose jazz quality. Sounds Heard from the Moon and The First Time I Sat Across from You have very similar patterns, as they start off more tranquil with the nice plucking sound, but then over time grow to be very chaotic and wild as they eventually settle back into a very different style pattern, but calms the songs towards the later end. Overall, this was a really interesting listen just to hear the mixtures between these two cultures, more of an American jazz presence and the Korean, more traditional Korean sound. I ended up giving this album a score of a 7.5 out of 10. So if you're in the mood for listening something more worldly, then I'd recommend you give this a shot. Well, guys, that's it for the show. If you guys cared for my reviews, then make sure to hit the like button or subscribe. And if you have any feedback for me, feel free to leave any comments at the bottom, or also definitely give me recommendations for things you'd want me to review. On the next, we'll be talking about the newest one from Jack White. See ya.